Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's just deeply profound and honestly universally human. Whether it's the weight of global events, a personal crisis, or just the heavy grind of daily life, we all know exactly what it feels like to be completely overwhelmed. But how do we actually process that? Well, today we're taking a fascinating look at how ancient poetic texts, specifically the Psalms of Lament found in historical scripture, map out this exact experience. As we're going to see, these ancient writers didn't just jot down their religious beliefs, they documented the raw, visceral reality of human distress, and in doing so, they provided us with a timeless roadmap for navigating our darkest moments.
So listen to this incredibly visceral quote from Psalm 13. "How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart?" What's so wild about this ancient text is how completely modern it feels, right? I mean, you could literally hear someone saying this today sitting in a therapist's office. These centuries-old texts perfectly capture the exact isolation, the racing anxiety, and the profound mental exhaustion that we still feel today. It really proves that the feeling of being trapped in your own mind isn't some new phenomenon. It's just a core part of the human condition.
Which brings us to our first major theme. Part 1. Acknowledging the deep waters.
What makes these ancient writings so enduring is that they absolutely never shy away from acknowledging profound despair. There's zero attempt to minimize human suffering here. Instead, the text leans directly into the pain, offering incredibly vivid language to describe the sensation of losing control. Just take a look at this striking imagery from Psalm 69. "I sink in the miry depths where there is no foothold. The floods engulf me." The writers of this source material consistently rely on the feeling of drowning to illustrate psychological and emotional crisis. Think about the sheer panic of water rising up to your neck, that desperate search for solid ground beneath your feet and finding nothing but mud. It's a perfect, terrifying metaphor for the feeling of being totally overwhelmed by circumstances you just cannot control.
But, the text goes even deeper than just metaphors. Let's walk through these textual symptoms of despair found across several of these psalms. The writers note being worn out from calling for help, having a parched throat, failing eyes. They describe bones burning like glowing embers, a heart blighted and withered like grass, and days vanishing like smoke. The really crucial point here is that these writers understood the mind-body connection centuries before modern psychology even existed. They connected emotional anguish directly to physical exhaustion and bodily pain. They understood that severe trauma literally wears down the physical body, which makes this poetry incredibly relatable and honestly surprisingly clinical.
But acknowledging the pain is only the beginning. Part 2, the cry for rescue.
When you step back and read a massive block of this scripture, a really clear, recurring psychological blueprint starts to reveal itself. It almost always moves in 3 distinct steps. First, the raw cry of affliction. Second, the active process of taking or seeking refuge. And third, the ultimate deliverance. It's a highly structured pathway out of the darkness. You can't reach deliverance without first making that cry and seeking out the shelter.
So, what does that first step, that cry, actually look like? Well, check out this line from Psalm 142. "I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble." I really want to emphasize that word complaint. The text absolutely encourages radical honesty. It doesn't ask the sufferer to just put on a brave face and pretend everything is fine. There is zero toxic positivity in this ancient wisdom. When your spirit grows faint, the text gives you full permission to loudly, clearly, and specifically complain about your trouble.
Once that radically honest cry is released, the structure shifts. Part 3. Finding a safe refuge.
This is exactly where we transition from intensely describing the problem, the drowning, the mud, the failing eyes, to desperately visualizing the solution. The writers construct this highly visual vocabulary of safety. Look at these specific, recurring poetic images. The rock, the fortress, the shield, the shadow of wings, the stronghold. When the reader feels like they're sinking in chaotic waters, the text provides these solid, immovable, and comforting anchors. They're essentially constructing a mental and spiritual safe space for the distressed reader to retreat into when the external world is just collapsing around them.
Notice how Psalm 57 applies that imagery. "I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed." This is such a brilliant metaphor. It provides a temporary, deeply comforting shelter, like a mother bird shielding her young. But notice that key phrase right at the end, "until the disaster has passed." It implies that the overwhelming disaster is just a passing storm. It's not a permanent state. It gives the reader a crucial psychological lifeline, the promise that survival is totally possible if you can just find shelter for a little while.
Which naturally leads us to part 4, the promise of protection. The poetry moves from the individual's desperate search for shelter to profound statements about a divine active response. Take this pivotal, incredibly famous line from Psalm 34, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." So the crucial takeaway here is that the text specifically targets those who feel completely defeated. Often, when people suffer, they feel profoundly isolated and abandoned, right? But the ancient text flips that script completely, promising proximity rather than distance in times of pain. The more broken you are, the closer the rescue becomes.
Think about how meticulous this literary symmetry is. The texts actually match every specific, terrifying threat with a corresponding, highly visual promise of protection. If the threat is a fowler's snare, a hunter's trap, the protection is escaping like a bird. If it's a deadly pestilence, you're covered with healing feathers. If you're drowning in deep, raging waters, you're drawn out to a spacious place. If you're bound by the cords of death, you're rescued from the grave. For literally every anxiety the human mind can conjure up, the poetry offers a direct, specific antidote.
And that meticulous dismantling of fear brings us to our final theme, Part 5, From Weeping to Rejoicing. The narrative arc of the lament doesn't just end with mere survival, it actually culminates in a massive emotional breakthrough. The heavy clouds finally part. We see this breakthrough visually in a comparison from Psalm 30. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. This perfectly demonstrates the foundational emotional pivot built into the source material. It fully acknowledges that the night is real, the weeping is real, and the darkness must be endured, but it guarantees that the morning will inevitably arrive. Time moves forward, and joy is fundamentally bound to the dawn.
The text takes it even further with another set of contrasts from the same passage. You turned my wailing into dancing, you removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. The physical expressions of grief, wailing loudly, wearing rough sackcloth in mourning, are totally transformed into expressions of celebration. The actual posture of the body physically changes from being curled up in a pit of despair to standing up and dancing.
Which brings us to the ultimate resolution, beautifully captured in Psalm 40. He lifted me out of the slimy pit. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Think back to our earlier discussion where the writer was sinking in the miry depths with no foothold. Now, all that chaotic, drowning imagery from the beginning is completely replaced with solid, unshakable ground. The problem presented at the very start of the emotional journey is decisively resolved. The foothold has finally been found.
So, what does a person do once their feet are back on solid ground? Well, the journey always ends here in the text, with these final resolutions. Singing a new song of praise, glorifying with thanksgiving, telling the story to the redeemed, dwelling in safety. It's really all about a restored sense of community. You don't just quietly survive, you become a beacon of hope. You share your story of surviving the deep waters so that others who are currently sinking know that rescue is absolutely possible.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ponder today. If you map your own moments of crisis to this ancient blueprint, where are you right now? Are you in the agonizing stage of the cry, pouring out your complaint? Are you actively seeking the temporary shelter of the refuge? Or have you finally reached the deliverance, standing on solid ground and ready to tell your story? These ancient texts prove that distress is a journey, not a destination. Thank you so much for joining me as we explored this fascinating psychological and poetic roadmap. I really hope it gives you a powerful new perspective on navigating your own deep waters.